And it was funny, how the program works is it's a year-long program, and you're with a cohort of peers that are in the same season of life. We cater to very successful marketplace leaders. And so I have 11 other people in my group. The guy next to me is Mike Ullman, CEO of JCPenney. The guy over here is an Accenture partner, and I'm a VP of marketing. I'm going, okay, I'm a little out of place here. And then 11 other people as well. But within 30 minutes, all titles are stripped because we were all completely lost of what we wanted to do. This was Mike Ullman's first stint with JCPenney when he retired. And the Apple guy came in, and now, obviously he's back. But this was right after he had retired the first time. And so I'm with these guys, and Bob Buford's sitting next to me. And so we're going around introducing ourselves, and Bob can tend to ramble. Some of you might know Bob. He can he makes a point. It just might be like this to get there. And he said, he introduced himself, and he said, and one of my principles that I believe in is when you're hanging on to one vine, look for the next. And then they said, now, Paul, why don't you introduce yourself? And I go, well, I just let go of my vine. I'm in midair. And I said, I'm sorry, Bob, I violated one of your principles, but I am looking for the next vine, and I'm falling, at the moment. And so I went through this, and you go through it with a cohort of peers, and then you get assigned an executive coach for a year. And what they found over the last 15 years is this season of halftime is especially with boomers. But Bob went through this season of halftime where he had more money than meaning. He craved more joy, impact, and balance, but he just wasn't getting it from his business. And Bob, if you guys know, and you guys will get the book at the end of this, and you can read it if you want to. He was a TV guy, so he was in the 70s and 80s, kind of got into the cable industry and at the incredible growth, and got to this point when he was 40 that he goes, I just don't know, this isn't what it's all about. Lost his son to a tragic accident when his son was 21. And so his mentor was Peter Drucker, father of modern management, and he would meet with him on a regular basis. And Peter said these words. He said, Bob, you need to know there's a lot of universities for the first half of life, but there's no universities for the second half of life. And Peter Drucker was a thinker and a futurist, and he said it's going to be a huge deal over the next 50 years because people are going to have 30, 40 bonus years that they didn't have 50 years ago because of health, technology, all kinds of stuff, bionic knees and shoulder replacements and all these things. And he goes, it's going to be a totally different thing when people hit 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, and they know that they have 20 years left of substantial production. And so Bob, he said, you ought to write a book about this. So he wrote Halftime in 1995. It's been 20 years this year. And he said, I talked to him the other day because we're working on the 20th commemorative edition, and he said, I was going to be happy if we sold 10,000 copies. Well, it became a bestseller. So he, of course, like a lot of authors, went around and spoke, and it got so popular, he said, I got to start an organization that will help men and women transition through this season of halftime because most people fail when they go it alone. They just kind of shove it down like I started to do, going, I got to be happy. I mean, look at this. I'm making good money, all this. I'm just going to shove it down and I'm going to deal with it. And that wasn't the case. And so I worked with a coach for a year, and I learned a billion things. But there's 3 lessons I wanted to share with you that I learned. One is I really learned we were created with a soul thirst for God. Now, for those of you that are Christians, that you're like, well, duh. And that was kind of my thing as well. But I learned it at a whole nother level, that there had been so many things that I had put in place of that yearning, that quest for purpose and significance, and tried to fill it with power or status or accumulation or whatever, relationships, anything. I coach people every day that are in this boat, that they are filling it with anything they can find other than God. And I just learned that it's not going to work. And what I learned and how I depicted it was, I believe there's believers and there's Christ followers. And a believer, if they die today, is going to go to heaven. They believe in the redemption of Christ and His grace, and that they can't do anything or perform and do enough to get to heaven. And I believe that. But do you know there's believers that you know, and there's Christ followers you know? And there's a difference in those two. And you begin thinking, if you think of a Christ follower right now, there's probably some characteristics that come out, that typical believers. And what's bad is when I talk to people, they believe about 80% of Christians are on the believer. That's where the hypocrisy of the church and all those things that you hear non-believers talk about. And so I said, what's the difference in a Christ follower and a believer? Well, it's really your heart. And if you really want to change your heart, you need to think differently. And this, for me, was an epiphany. And it's really Romans 12:1 and 2, but for me, it was brand new. And I remember this quote I read during this thing from Dr. Dan Gilbert at Harvard. He said, "The heart goes where the head takes it, and neither cares much about the whereabouts of the feet." And it reminded me of Romans 12:1 and 2, and this is from the Message. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. So for me, at halftime, they talk about it's a head journey and a heart journey. Most people come to the program going, what do I want to do next? Especially working with successful marketplace leaders, we're doers, we're performers. But the question also is, who do you need to become in order to do what God's calling you to you next? And so it's a head and a heart journey, and this was definitely a heart journey for me. The second thing was God uniquely shaped us with gifts and experiences that can fuel our second half. I love the metaphor of halftime. Maybe because I'm a sports guy, but you know, whether it's an NBA halftime or an NFL game, you come into halftime and first of all, you rest. And that's key because we're not very good at resting. But you rest. And what do you do then? The coach, you guys talk about, what did you do in the first half that worked? What did you do that didn't work? What do we need to adjust to make the second half a lot better than the first half? And that's really what the whole metaphor of halftime is it's a pause to look back at your first half and see what you can learn to make the second half even better. And no, it's not necessarily chronological. Who was I talking to? Said, Jay, I'm in the fourth quarter. Okay, you could be in the fourth. We don't know, right? I could be in the fourth quarter. I could have 12 seconds left. I don't know. But the metaphor of halftime is just so powerful. And one of the things they do at halftime is they talk about this model called the 3 C's. And the first C, and these are those 3 circles on your handout. The first C is your core. Is talking about who are you at your core. Now, when I first heard this with my coach, I kind of rolled my eyes. Oh, here we go. I'm going to take a Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment or something. I've had so many performance appraisals. I know what I'm good at. I know what I suck at. You know, what am I going to do? But it was combining those strengths with your passions. And that was a new thing for me. What was I passionate about? And I don't know about you, but I turned my dreamer off years ago. I don't know how. Remember when we were kids? We had no problem. I had an imaginary friend, but it was a camel. That's pretty creative. A 2-humped camel named Shabubu, you know? But somehow that, some might say craziness, but creativity left me, right, when you get in the world or whatever, and I stopped dreaming for whatever reason. And so this was a really good exercise. What are you passionate about? What makes you cry? What makes you angry? When you look at the Wall Street Journal or USA Today or whatever, what just you go to and you're mad? Or you're sad or whatever, you see inner city poverty and it speaks at your heart or whatever. So my coach kind of took me through this process of what that looked like. And then the second C was capacity, and you can't see it all. It's margin in your time, money, and spiritual capacity. And it's time, if you're going to find out who you are and what you want to do, you got to have time to do it. So you have to have some margin from a time perspective. And financial margin doesn't mean wealthy and independently wealthy for the rest of your life, which is what Bob Buford was when you read his books. Everybody thinks that that's the case. It's just simply financial margin. My coach said, you can't be cash flow negative and live out your calling. So just make sure you have financial margin. Make sure you're not in debt. You know, make sure you have that. And then spiritual overflow. Make sure you have margin in your life. If you're going to be asked to love others, you better fully understand God's love, and then it overflows out of your heart. And it goes a lot deeper than that, but that's what we'll talk about. And then the third C was context. If you find out who you are and you have the capacity to go out, what's it going to look like? Are you going to stay right where you are? A lot of people, because they read Bob's book and he left the television industry and started a couple nonprofits, that if you come to the Halftime Institute, you got to go quit what you're doing and go start something in Rwanda. And that couldn't be further from the truth. God may call you to do that. But about 50 to 60% of the people that come through our program stay in the platform they actually are right then when they start. We had a guy named Tony that he had a bunch of car dealerships in the Raleigh-Durham area, and he came going, I know God's going to tell me to sell those, and I'm going to go do something for him. And by the time he went through all of this, he had a knack for making money. He was a really good businessman. So he started a We Care program in his car dealerships, first aimed at helping and ministering to his own employees, and then they said, how can we be Jesus to the 3-mile radius around each of our car dealerships? Totally changed his paradigm through the coaching. So it could be stay, it could be join like I did. I left Ecolab, joined the Halftime Institute. Could be start something, or a mixture of all three of those. And then not only that, what's your role in that organization? You ever been in a role that doesn't fit? You know, in a role you did that was just a perfect fit for you. So that was another lesson is, you know, where's my sweet spot? And working with a coach, I identified 3 or 4 areas that God has uniquely shaped me. And I wanted to make sure I was plugged into those things somehow in some way that would bring me joy. Then lessons learned. The third one, it's never too late. This is a big one for me. It's real common when you get to this halftime point and you look back, is you look back with regret. I've wasted my life. You know, like I had 50 conversations about God in 6 weeks at Ecolab, and I didn't have any at 10, you know, for 10 years, or not many, for 10 years. You know, the Amtrak wreck that just happened, the 8th guy they found I worked with at Ecolab. I never shared Christ with them. So it's real easy to play that, to get into that guilt, and there's a difference in that guilt and that conviction, but it's really easy to do that. And I had to get to a point where I said, it's not too late, it's never too late. And I found some examples. You know, Colonel Sanders started KFC at age 65? I mean, that's amazing. Julia Child wrote The Art of Mastering the Art of French Cooking at age 49. Mother Teresa started the Missionaries of Charity at age 40, won a Nobel Peace Prize at 69. Gandhi's Salt March was when he was 61 years old. Ray Kroc started McDonald's at age 52. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote Little House on the Prairie series at age 65. Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa at 75. I mean, there is a lot that goes on in the second half of life. Peter Drucker said his best books, he always said his best book was his next book, but his best book was, most of them came after age 50. And so it's never too late. And I had to really realize that that's really key, that I'm just getting started, that God has given me experiences and tragedy and joy and relationships and failures and everything that can really build a platform and a foundation for a significant second half.